Well, good afternoon to all those in the UK, good evening to those in Japan, and a warm welcome back to this quarterly Japan Society webinar, hosted jointly with Asia Society Tokyo. I am Bill Emmett, and as many of you know, I am now a former chair of the Japan Society, and it is my great pleasure to moderate these Japan Macro Salons. All of these macro salons are special, but this one promises to be even more special than usual. Not, I hasten to add, because Donald Trump has bizarrely christened today, April the 2nd, as Liberation Day, but because we will be joined by a very distinguished guest, Kono Taro, one of the most experienced cabinet ministers that Japan has had, having been variously foreign minister, defense minister, and most recently digital minister, and much else besides. As our regular attendees know, every quarter in these salons, I am joined by our also very special friend, Jesper Koll, well known as a Japan optimist, but also for more than 3 decades, one of the highest rated economists and strategists in Japan. Jesper has worked with the best, including JP Morgan and Merrill Lynch, and is now an expert director at the Monex Group, as well as a board director at the Okinawa Institute for Science and Technology, and an advisor to us all. Kono-sensei will join us in about 10 minutes' time, but first, as usual, I want to begin by reviewing recent economic trends with Jesper. Throughout the webinar, please feel free to submit questions at any time using the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and to vote for others' questions to bring them more quickly to my attention. But Jesper, great to see you. It is a difficult and momentous day for everyone looking at their prospects in the face of what's going to happen. But let's start by just looking at the Japanese economic context. What's the state, how, as you see it, of the Japanese economy as we enter this period of uncertainty?
And look, Bill, it's really fascinating to see that the domestic indicators, we actually keep on getting stronger. The corporate metabolism and the overall metabolism within the economy keeps on firming. Specifically, just to be very clear, that investment in human capital, continues to increase. You've all seen the wage negotiations, coming in for the second year running just above 5%. You find that starting salaries for the young graduates who joined their companies, just yesterday, on average rising, by almost 12%. So, very, very good investment in human capital coming through. And it's very interesting, Bill, when you look at the split between the large corporations and small and medium-sized companies, or service companies and industrial companies, you actually find that it's across the board. And this is also evidenced in the initial surveys on business investment expenditure plans of Japanese corporations. The Bank of Japan just published its Tankan survey, which is the best sort of pulse in terms of data, the finger on the pulse of the Japanese economy. And you find that, again, business investment expenditure in the new financial year that just started yesterday, once again is expected to increase, this time by around 3 percentage points, after a 9 percentage point increase in the 12 months that just came. And typically these surveys start conservative. So the bottom point is, that on the domestic front, things look very, very encouraging. Corporate metabolism is very strong. Investment in human capital, investment in research and development, investment in upgrading and adding, domestic capacity across industrial and the non-tradable goods sector, the service sector, very, very good. And then last but not least, Bill, we all care about finance and we care about mergers and acquisitions. And you may have seen that just a couple of days ago in the casualty insurance market, this announcement of a potential merger between the number three player and the number four player, Mitsui Sumitomo and Aoi Nissei, actually, and if they were to merge, and the plan is to do so by the end of 2026, that would actually surpass Tokyo Marine and Fire. So the bottom line is, and we've talked about this in previous sessions, the corporate metabolism is very good, and the industrial consolidation through mergers and acquisitions, is actually accelerating very nicely. And then one final point, you and I talked about this before, exit. Bankruptcies continue to increase very nicely, and if you look at the data from the Tokyo Stock Exchange, last year, the first year ever, there were more delistings than new listings. New listings, IPOs still very strong at just about 100, but delistings slightly higher at 105 companies. So, industrial consolidation a la japonaise. It's not Elon Musk style. Nobody's taking a chainsaw to anything here, but the consolidation and the creation of national champions is starting.
So that is, in a way, as you say, a creative destruction, Japanese style, with the destruction modified for Japanese circumstances, shall we say. But that is very positive. One piece of data that we've discussed before that maybe you could illuminate on, you mentioned the shunto, the wage rises, the new starting salaries and so forth. A key, if you like, contest within the data, as we've discussed, has been about real wages on a macro basis, whether the wages were keeping pace with the inflation pressure. How does that look now? Are real wages on a macro basis looking like they're overtaking now?
No. And this is, again, where for an economist, as opposed to an investor, the aggregate news is not quite positive, because inflation is very sticky. And particularly food price inflation, energy inflation, reduces the purchasing power of practically every 1 in 4 Japanese, the people who live off a pension. And as a result of that, in aggregate, thank you, excellent for the young generation, where the scarcity of skills, now leads to demand for labor outpacing, the supply of labor, and the prices are responding. But against that, the baby boom generation is continuing to see real wages, real incomes, decline, for that age set actually by about 2.5% to 3%. So you've got this dichotomy that's going on, but as an investor, you care about, the young generation that creates the future.
Of course, but that's a very important and interesting macro indicator. Now, today we cannot avoid the fact that this afternoon tariffs will be announced in the Rose Garden of the White House. What's your opening sense about how to think about the impact of those on Japan, corporate Japan, and on the Japanese economy? And then we'll bring in Kono Sensei.
Look, as you know, I have a tendency to be optimistic, but I also look at just the data. And unfortunately, I think people are underestimating the damage that tariffs will have on Japan. And, here the analysis, most of the people focus on the impact on GDP, and they find that a 10% tariff increase would reduce Japan's GDP by about 0.25%, 0.3%, more or less a rounding error for all intents and purposes, right? Now, remember, for listed companies, they are very dependent on the global economy in general, and on the US economy, on North America in particular. About 1/3 of the earnings of listed companies are generated from dealings in North America. And as a result of that, what you actually find is that it's, a 25% tariff could actually cut Japanese corporate earnings on its own, just arithmetically, by about 5 percentage points. And then, of course, on top of that, assuming that the tariffs are going to have a negative impact on the US economy, that you actually do get what I call the Elon Musk recession in America, then remember that every 1 percentage point drop in US GDP cuts Japanese corporate profits by about 10 percentage points. So, all of a sudden, it's very, 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 if just looking at the data, it's very easy to see Japanese corporate earnings fall, by double digit, from the negative impact of the tariffs that are coming here. Huge amounts of uncertainties, right? Both for Japanese producers who have to deal with this stuff, as well as, of course, for US consumers who have to deal with the tariffs and the uncertainties created by, the budget cuts, that are going on and the entitlement cuts that are going on under Elon Musk there. But, the sad part ultimately is that for corporate Japan itself, alternative sources of corporate profits, right, are just not there. Now, you shouldn't get too worried because the retained earnings, the buffer that Japanese companies have on their balance sheet to do, with a year of to cope with a year of negative corporate earnings, that buffer is very, very strong. But still, if you're an investor in the here and now, the structural bull case for Japan remains intact because of this rise in the corporate metabolism that we've spoken about. But cyclically, the negativity of the MAGA, the Make America Great Again policies, Japan will take it on the chin.
Excellent overview and background, and that's a very important caution about the corporate earnings in particular and the impact of an American recession that may well come to this. Let us welcome Kono Sensei to this webinar. If you could turn on your video, Kono Sensei. There we are. Welcome.
Good evening or good morning or whatever.
Whatever it is. Exactly. Welcome to the Japan Society. Delighted that you could join us. Thank you for taking the time.
Thank you very much.
And I gave a brief introduction earlier, as you heard. What I didn't mention was that, of course, you, as is well known to many, you studied at Georgetown at the Institute of Foreign Service. So you know the Washington scene and the foreign service scene very well. But also you've negotiated, of course, as foreign minister, as defense minister with the United States on many occasions. You've heard what Jesper says about the corporate impact of the announcements that will come today and the resilience of corporate Japan. How would you assess and evaluate the resilience of, if you like, political Japan and governmental Japan in dealing with this day and the impact of what's coming?
Thank you. Well, I have heard so many estimate of the impact of this tariff. Well, but I will leave it to analysts and economists. Well, we sort of expected what's going to happen during the Trump too, and I think it's happening. And some people say this is the beginning of the end of the relationship or alliance between the United States and Japan. I wouldn't go that far, but this is definitely the beginning of structural change in the relationship of two countries or this alliance. Where China is still trying to expand its influence militarily or in terms of economy or in the real world, in cyber world. And Japan's sitting next to China. And I think we need to be doing a lot more. And we would have welcomed partnership with the United States. But the unpredictability or unreliability of Washington today just force us to think, can we continue with plan A or do we need to have plan B? We'll probably need to start making some kind of plan B into the future. And so this put us in real difficult position. I think Europe, EU, probably in a similar situation, but their reliance on United States in terms of security is a little bit less than Japan. We sit next to China, we sit next to North Korea, there's Russia, and we don't know what's going to happen to South Korean politics. They could have a new president who could be leaning to China, like the previous president. And so we don't really have trusting allies at this moment around Japan. And then United States, we don't know which way they are trying to go. So we really have to think about our future, what we need to do, how we going to survive in, I don't know, next decade or 2 or 3 decades.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a fascinating framework to put it in. You're not quite saying what Mark Carney said about the Canada-US relationship, that the old friendly, close relationship was over, but you were saying you have to think about the possibility that it might be over, and that and go for structural change. Now, of course, the question that your fascinating remarks immediately lead me to ask is, what would Plan B look like? In other words, what can Plan B be? Perhaps I'll put that in a way another way around. In the 1980s, when Jesper and I were young men here in Tokyo, it was often said that the security relationship between the US and Japan acted as the ultimate restraint on the economic friction on all of the Boeki Masatsu issues that the Pentagon would argue against going too far on Japan. Now, that relationship does appear to be changing. There seems to be a disconnection now in US thinking, in the way that a month ago one might have thought in a 1980s sort of way that actually Japan would be limited because of its security importance for America. But you clearly don't think Japan can depend on that. And the question, therefore, is how can Japan respond? What is Plan B kind of set of thinking, even if you don't want to throw Plan A off the desk totally?
Well, back in 1980s, we didn't really have global China.
No.
I mean, China was, big country in terms of population, but they were not a part of a global economy. Soviet Union was sort of isolated with Eastern Europe. So the situation is quite different. Now China is militarily much stronger than Soviet Union, and their global economic power is nowhere compared to old Soviet Union. And the global South is, well, they are, I think, trying to choose between the West or China-Russia alliance, and the power of global South is much, much bigger than 1980s. So that's where we are. And I think that Japan need US-Japan alliance more than ever, probably more than 1980s. And we thought United States would need Japan more than they needed Japan back in the 80s. But I think the Washington is throwing that away. So I think Japan need to develop deep relationship with Europe, Asia, especially South Korea, the Philippines, Australia, New Zealand, maybe Vietnam. So we really need to establish a relationship. And I have been arguing for asking NATO to expand, not just the North Atlantic, but into Indo-Pacific. I mean, right now, NATO is sort of regional organization, but we hope to see NATO expanded, and it would be something to protect common values of like democracy, human rights, rule of law kind of thing. And we'll probably need to amend the Constitution, especially Article 9, so that we can be part of a collective defense and we can be part of NATO, and we can say we will do what required of Japan to protect common values and the peace and stability on this planet. And in order to do that, we need to change the constitution. We need to probably expand defense industry. And we really need to modernize self-defense force and things like that. And that would cost us a lot more. We are trying to reach 2% of GDP for defense spending. It might require us to spend more than 2%. And then we have to, I think, really deal with the budget issue. But that's something we need to think about in terms of security. In terms of economy, I think we really need to increase our ties to Asia, Middle East, Europe. I think we need to encourage Japanese companies to go really global, not just looking at the United States market, but I think they need to really go global. And I think that's something we need to start thinking about.
Yes, and I mean, the paradox of the situation, it seems to me politically, for Japan has a similarity to Europe in that actually what the right response is that we will do in defense and security terms is in line with what America would like. Everything that you've said is actually what America would want. Japan spending more on defense, Japan revising Article 9 to be able to be part of collective defense, and that is part of this strange simplistic accusation that Donald Trump has about the US-Japan Security Treaty, that it obliges America to protect Japan but doesn't oblige Japan to protect America, and that this is somehow unfair. In a way, that further reform to the rules around collective defense would do what he wants, or at least what he says he wants. And yet, really, what you're describing is we're a move towards a greater strategic autonomy that gives you more independent agency in how you behave. Even if you do align with the US conveniently, you will also have new options in this. And maybe we should move on to the economic side a little bit and bring Jesper in. I mean, what do you think yeah, so you go on, Jesper.
No, I think it's absolutely fascinating, and I mean this unreliability of the United States of America under the current Trump team. And let's I mean, for 30 seconds, I mean, it's still very early on. It's the early games. It's the big hanabi, that is sort of flying off. What this will look like, how the Trump policies are going to modify, once America has a recession, remains to be seen. But the point I wanted to make is that actually, when you look at corporate behavior, right, the global production map and the global profit map is actually very, very balanced, in the sense of that, you've got 1/3 of the earnings coming from the United States, you've got 1/3 of the earnings, coming from China, and you've got 1/3 of the earnings coming from, the rest of Asia Pacific, and a little bit, domestically. So it's quite interesting, and you've seen Toyota Corporation over the last couple of months doubling down. They're building another factory in the People's Republic of China. You have seen this dichotomy. The American Defense Secretary was just in Tokyo, at the end of last week, and it was a model alliance. There was nowhere near the kind of super pressure that America or Mr. Vance, puts on the Germans, for example. It's a model alliance. Everything is working fine. And, now America is even going to, build further outposts, in the southern tips of Okinawa. Rather than withdrawing all the way to Guam, so it's quite interesting, that there is this big difference where actually the military alliance, for all intents and purposes, is working very, very well, but the economic tit for tat, Japan getting special treatment for being so compliant to American demands on the military side, there is nothing that is being given. And that's the dichotomy, I think, that we have to come to live with.
And Kono Sensei, you respond, and then I'll ask another question. Yeah.
Thank you. Well, Europe sits next to Russia. And if you compare Russia to China, it's a kid brother. I mean, they're fighting war in Ukraine. But they need assistance from China and North Korea. So, and Europe is somewhat coherent. There are some countries who might have a different idea, but in general, EU or NATO could act as one, and they have very good defense industry. So their reliance on United States is much, much less than Japan. We sit next to China, we sit next to North Korea, and Russia still occupy our northern territory. And China is exercising around Taiwan even now. And so if we try to go independent, the resource we need to spend will be much, much bigger than what the Europeans are spending. So it's going to be much heavier burden on us. And how much could we trust United States in times of crisis? We never thought we need to ask this question before. Now, what Vice President Vance said in Munich, if he has that in his mind, we don't know what he has, what kind of idea he has on Japan. And if entire Republican is moving that direction, this Trump too may not end in 4 years. It could go on and on. So we really need to see different United States. So there are a lot of question marks, and we hope this is just a big fireworks, and at the end of the day, nothing much maybe changing. We really still hoping that, but it could change drastically. It could open the door to the whole new world, and I think we cannot take the risk. We need to prepare some kind of plan B. So on our budget, on our security planning, on our political environment, it's going to be a big burden on Japan.
There's no doubt about that, and no, I can absolutely recognize the sense that you're making about the change in the potential scenarios that could come now from the United States. That's really the key point that you're making. I mean, definitely the central scenario would be that the American interest is so defined by an adversarial relationship with China that they should be continuing in the path that they've been doing. But this leads to I accept that this is not, you cannot say that it's absolutely certain because of the variety of opinion and behavior in the Republican Party. But what does this imply for you about Japan's relationship with number one, China, and number two, Taiwan, but particularly China? How do you, in this situation, navigate the China relationship?
Well, since the election of President Trump, China is trying to get closer to Japan in many ways. I think Chinese attitude has changed in many aspects, but we really need to differentiate. We used to say we need to differentiate the Chinese people and the Chinese Communist Party, but now we have to say we have to separate Xi Jinping, Chinese Communist Party, and Chinese people. And hopefully, one day China will come back as a good player in the global economy, global politics, player according to the global rules, but they are not. And we know China is sort of reacting to the President Trump. It's very instrumental. Their recent activity very instrumental, and they could change. So we cannot really change the fundamental thinking towards China. We could make some small changes in terms of economy or trade or movement of the people. But in terms of real security thinking, I don't think anything has changed yet. And I don't think anything is changing. Yeah. And in terms of Taiwan, well, Japan alone cannot do much. So what the United States really going to do to defend Taiwan, or whether United States is going to defend Taiwan, that would affect us. And our planning will be sort of secondary to what the United States strategy towards Taiwan. And we should be exchanging frank views and ideas about what we're going to do together in times of crisis. I'm wondering if we could continue that kind of discussion with Washington.
Jesper, you were wanting to come in.
No, I just wanted to dovetail on something. I mean, obviously, the People's Republic of China has been making overtures. We've had several very high-level ministerial meetings between Japan and the People's Republic of China, some including South Korea, some not, over the last couple of months there. But strategically, think about it, in key technologies that America provides, which is finance and computers and cloud services and all this stuff. I mean, what am I going to do? Am I going to stand in front of a Japanese industrial corporation and say, you should start to shift your cloud provider to a Chinese provider? I cannot do that. You should shift your payment system away from the US, global standard and shift towards something that the People's Republic of China is developing. You cannot do that because, in the key areas of trust, which is finance, which is security, and, which is compute, it is the Americans that absolutely dominate, not just in terms of providing the tech, but also in terms of, providing the governance, around this, while the governance around finance, the governance around compute from the People's Republic of China is just ultimately completely unacceptable to anybody. So I find it very, very interesting, that you've got, America really, and this is obviously Mr. Trump, senses this as a long, world-renowned bully. America is operating from a position of incredible strength because you have no alternative. You can talk about de-dollarization all day long. Practically speaking, it is not possible.
Well, you know, when we talked about two systems in one nation in Hong Kong,
Nice.
the last resort was their judiciary system, their legal system. Their parliament fell, their executive body fell, but as long as Hong Kong's legal system is intact, we sort of trusted their two system, one country. And look at the United States.
Mm-hmm.
Really? I mean, the president says something and the court, could they really stop president? Or is the United States legal system is what we have believed, or is it going to change? You know, so when we deal with the big platformer, American platformers, we kind of trust their business is according to their constitution, their legal system. If Washington wants to do something to make American corporation bigger or great, do we really trust American constitution system? That's the question I'm afraid we may have to be asking in near future. So the absolute trust in the US system is being questioned, not today, not tomorrow, but we never thought about this before, but some people are already asking. And do American people know that? Do American people feel the sense? I think that's what we need to tell, maybe not Washington, but maybe New York, Los Angeles, Chicago. Are you really going to allow Washington to lead this way? I mean, what's the difference? I mean, when I was a foreign minister, you know, when I talked to the countries of Global South, and we criticized China for not obeying the global rules, you know, not, you know, violating international norm, they always ask me, what about the United States? Why don't you say the same thing to Washington, D.C.? And I think more and more Global South are saying the similar thing. That's why we couldn't get their support for sanction against Russia. You know, they might vote in United Nations. They might vote with us, but they're not with us on the sanction. It's partially because they don't really trust the United States, their double standard. Now, I think their distrust, antipathy towards the United States is getting bigger and bigger. And that's why Xi Jinping's probably smiling. And Europe and Japan, Australia, maybe Canada, we are sitting in the middle and thinking about the worst possible situation. And we are hoping that doesn't happen. So, I mean, yes, we're not going to use Chinese system. We're not going to trust China for security issues. Yes, that's true. But, I mean, some NATO countries are questioning if they could continue using America's black box technology in the fighter jet.
Yeah.
You know, they are even asking that. And they even ask me, does Japan really trust the black box on F-15? Or is that why we are dealing with UK, Italy for new fighter jet? You know, that's the question fairly openly people start asking.
No, these are fundamental questions, and you are absolutely right to highlight the potential that really the financial community in the US should start to get worried if trust in the US legal system erodes. for their own personal interests. But that raises a question, perhaps bringing us back to, if like, the future negotiation that will happen after the tariff announcements today. The point that you and Jesper have both made about the digital deficit, about the dependence on platforms. Actually, there are two sides to that point. That actually the Japanese market is important to some large, powerful American corporations, and that there are, and the same in Europe. I mean, in Europe, in our negotiations with the US, the Digital Services Act and the regulation of the tech companies is going to be a very important piece of negotiating leverage with the US over this. So I wonder if you were now as a foreign minister or METI minister and needing to enter into a negotiation after what is laid out this afternoon, how would what would be the levers that you would seek to use to try to push back what America is going to land on Japan this afternoon? Would you be using the business of American companies in Japan, particularly tech companies? What would you be considering to be your weapons or your cards, perhaps, in this poker game?
Well, I think I have to admit we have less cards than Europe has. We really depending on United States defense industry for our procurement, starting from F-35 to all those missiles thing.
Yes.
So I think we need to. I don't think we can go after Canada, but I think we have to convince Washington dealing with Japan, doing business with Japan will benefit American economy.
Yes.
When I was foreign minister and Prime Minister Abe and I talked to President Trump, the Japanese corporation in United States are exporting out of United States. And if that count for Japan, the trade deficit between US and Japan is much, much smaller. And the President Trump somewhat listened to that. So I think unlike Canada or Europe, we need to convince Washington that doing business with Japan would be beneficial for US economy. That's number one. Number two, as you mentioned, the digital deficit of Japan is growing, and that's something we really need to deal with. And I think we need to work with Europe or India, ASEAN, or some Middle East country to create some kind of alternative to that. I think we failed to invest in digital and AI in Japan. We need to increase capacity. I don't think we can build AI technology to go directly compete against the big AI platform of United States. But Japan may be able to develop something inexpensive and efficient, just like we built a Japanese automobile. I think that's something Japan should be able to do that. So we may not directly compete against the United States, but we are trying to look at the market where Japan could be competitive. And I think we focus our investment in those technological areas.
Yes,
for 30 seconds, Bill, if I can chime in there, that actually you've already got a model laid out there. And I obviously echo what Kono Sensei just said here. But, think about what Japan offers and what America needs. America now is going to, redevelop and double down on its energy supremacy. And whether it's Alaskan gas, whether it is shale gas, whether it's more pipelines, That stuff's very capital intensive. Japan is the world's largest supplier of capital. Japan actually has the production technology to make the best pipes, if you want to build more pipelines. And I think that, the scope for standard industrial public-private partnerships along, fund GP, LP type structure, the room for Japan and America to cooperate and profit together, is actually very large. And we already have a model, because, I mean, it sounds funny, but, what Mr. Masayoshi Son and Stargate, we're going to do $500 billion of investments, in digital infrastructure in the United States of America. I'm in with 100. And Trump looks at him and said, well, you should be doing more. And Mr. Son, looks Trump in the eye and says, yeah, I'll do more if you do more. Now, that's the right attitude, because it's, again, think about whatever we think about Mr. Trump and about whether all of this makes sense or doesn't make sense, but he does want to make deals. He does want to see these investments. And whether it is building pipelines, whether it is building tankers, whether it is building, icebreakers for the northern polar roads, that are starting to open up, the sea lanes there, which Japan can build, America can no longer build. That's the sort of initiatives, I think, where a win-win situation and a new US-Japan partnership can actually develop.
Very interesting. No, a lot of good points there. Now I'm going to lower the tone slightly for a second because I want to bring in a question from the attendees, but also I'm violating Jesper's claim at the beginning of our conversation that we could avoid talking about monetary policy for a second, because I think we need to mention the yen. And Mark Partington on the Q&A has asked, I've lost it now, if Trump wants a dramatically higher yen, how would the Japanese economy cope? But that leads me into a question about what role could the yen play, in that Trump does claim that the yen is unfair in all sorts of ways. I know that this is not in the control of the Japanese government, but the yen has been strengthening since Trump's election, from 158 to 150 roughly now. Do you think there's a possibility of a symbolic, and Trump likes symbolic things, role being played in this by a further strengthening of the yen? I would venture to suggest that could take some pressure off Japan, but what would the impact be? Kono-sensei, what do you think about the yen as a tool in the hands of Japanese diplomacy?
Well, I don't think we should use the currency to make a deal with President Trump. But the Japanese, or especially Japanese business, love the weak yen. When yen get weaker, the stock price goes up. It was the case really back in 20th century. But nowadays, so many corporations have been investing overseas for production. So when yen get weaker, we don't increase the export volume. Simply, Toyota get bigger profit, but supply chain don't share the profit. So, and Japan with aging society, more and more people are living on pension. So stronger yen is actually good for the Japanese economy. I think we need to change our mind. Back in 20th century, maybe weak yen would be good for Japanese business, but nowadays strong yen could be good for the Japanese economy. And I think Bank of Japan, I think they need to act very independently. They need to show it's an independent institution. The issue is the budget deficit. For last 20, 30 years, with almost zero interest, the Japanese government could borrow as much as they want. and debt service didn't really increase. But with the interest rate ticking up, I think the Japanese government really need to think about balancing the budget or coping with the deficit. It's a very hard because the Conservative Party LDP is for big government, and all the opposition parties are for bigger government. There's no Republican, there's no conservative in Japan, and the people so used to not restraining the expenditure. So politically, it's very difficult. But I think we may see interest rate just jumping up if the government continue to spend as we have been. So it's time for the Japanese government to change the tack and trying to focus on budget restraint. And that would have impact on the currency. So I think indirectly we will deal with the currency, but I don't think we should use the currency to make deal with President Trump. We don't please him with the currency rate.
No. Jesper, would you have a comment on the currency? I
think that it would be nice to have the currency as a tool, but the currency is an outcome, and the ability to influence, obviously in the short term, you can do intervention, you can do all sorts of things. But, the interesting thing is that, there's all this talk about what was that called? The Mar-Lago Accord and all this stuff, and everything is hush hush and nobody knows about this. So, by the way, it's very interesting. If you look at the details, nobody was going to call it the Plaza Accord. That was decided just when it happened. There wasn't any talk beforehand. Here in classic Trump fashion, we're talking about the Great Accord that happens at his home in Florida, but nobody knows what it's all about. While with the Plaza Accord, you actually had the senior most elite bureaucrats around the world, plus the most elite economists and financial experts, basically talking for about 6 months before the Plaza Accord was actually hammered out. There was a intellectual backbone that was thorough and complete buy-in from all the financial leaders, in the world. And voila, you could actually do this, with relatively little policy adjustment at the time. Today, foreign exchange volumes are about 15 times higher than they were at the time of the Plaza Accord. So, and as Kono-sensei pointed out, the big factor, of course, is the reality of the People's Republic of China, which also happens to be a very large creditor country. They have the ability, they're now a viable player, in this market. And so what I'm trying to say is that this idea that you can somehow have another Bretton Woods or another Plaza Accord where the world is going to dance to America's, desires, it's unrealistic. It's not the world that we live in. It's not, it's not the reality. So, currency forecasting at the moment is furiously difficult because, of the, uncertainty, both structural and cyclical, forced by this regime change that the Trump administration is trying to engender. My personal opinion is that we get what I would call bad dollar weakness, that Mr. Powell is going to be forced to cut interest rates, because America falls into a recession.
Yeah. So
and then it gets interesting because, once we're back at 110, 115, obviously, and Governor Ueda has been very clear about this already, is that over the last, 6 weeks, the risk profile in the global economy has deteriorated. And as a result of that, the Bank of Japan has become much more cautious, right, about their, proceedings.
Yeah, no, indeed. I think that does certainly a logical potential outcome of what could happen in the, as you call it, the Musk recession. Now, just on a specific question that's been asked you was there was a mention about artificial intelligence from Kono Sensei and you, Jesper, about Massa and the big Stargate announcement. What role, Tomoko Sasaki asks, what role can the government play in that? Should the government be involved with the AI investment and organization in Japan and about Japan more than it is, or is this something to be left to the private sector completely?
Thank you. Well, it was kind of fashionable for the government and academia to talk about how to regulate AI when I was digital minister. So I said, okay, forget it. We need to use AI before we can talk about how to regulate it.
Yeah.
I think we are still lagging behind in the use of AI. We fail to invest in digital, and a very similar thing is happening in Japan. We definitely need to promote AI. And I think the government policy is to make Japan the easiest country to develop AI technology. So we loosen up like copyright protection law. And so people can come to Japan and develop AI. I mean, when they use it, there's a very strict copyright protection. So what we are trying to do is we are regulating AI with soft law, just like the United Kingdom or United States. And regulation need to be very agile because technology moves much faster, and regulation need to follow the advancement of technology. So we need to be able to adjust our regulation accordingly. So the government involvement should be, I think, as little as possible. I think that's what we prefer. And what the government need to do is we need to encourage higher education to turn out more AI digital expert. The Japanese university not putting enough resource into digital AI, quantum computing field. And that's why we are lagging behind. So we need to encourage the higher education institute to invest more, and the government need to help the universities, research institute to do that. I think that's what the government need to do. And we also need to encourage some capital inflow into digital and AI. Compared to GAFA, I think the Japanese AI startups are much, much smaller. So as I said, we cannot have a direct competition, but we are hoping those startups would focus where they are good at, and they could build a good technology in certain field with competitiveness.
Thank you. No, that's fascinating. We're running towards the end of our time. Lots of questions have come in. One of them I'm going to just read out to you because you won't be able to answer it. How soon can Japan expect an alternative plan B ready to be in place? Brackets, or is this top secret? Probably the real secret is that there is no plan B yet, but there needs to be one, is my guess privately. But other questions about how fast defense spending can be increased, a lot about the role of NATO in Asia. I think this has provoked a terrific sort of thinking among all of our attendees. Jesper, would you like any final word on what you've heard? And then I'll hand over to Kono Sensei just to say a very final word.
Oh, look, I mean, I think that, ironically, I mean, there's all these fireworks, and it's obviously originating from the United States. And obviously the impact is very real. When I spent the last week sort of talking to CEOs in Nagoya and in Osaka, heavy manufacturing people. And, I mean, my advice, is like, look, the real problem is, and this dovetails to something Kono Sensei was saying, right? We can think about Trump and the tactical implications of what you need to do, in order to deal with the tariffs. More importantly, if you're a Daikin, if you're a Yokogawa Electric, if you're a Fanuc, right? What is your global strategic production map? Where are you going to have capacity, over the next 5 to 10 years? And this is where it gets interesting, because I think the probability that America in our generation is ever going back towards a multilateral, rules-based, rather than tactical, in America's interest, first-based, free trading system, that probability is close to nil, whether the Democrats come in or not. And as a result of that, I think that, strategically placing your factories behind the regional blocks, I think becomes absolutely imperative. And that's, I think, just the reality that you have to deal with. There is no stabilizer in the world economy. China, for a variety of reasons, most of them involving trust, cannot be the stabilizer. And as Kono Sensei pointed out, the reliability of the US as the stabilizer is also being undermined. But the United States will continue to be one of the most prosperous, structurally high growth, homogeneous markets. You have to be there. So scrap your factory in Mexico and build one in Arizona.
Mhm. Kono Sensei, thank you so much for being with us. It's been a privilege to have you as part of this conversation. Very, very wide-ranging thinking. Please come back again sometime. But secondly, we will continue the conversation about what Plan B should be and how it evolves as circumstances force it to emerge. And I think that's going to be the important thing to keep thinking about as time goes on. But we must.
Kono Sensei, I hope you're writing it. You're writing Plan B, and then we have your comeback as Prime Minister.
Thank you so much.
We look
Appreciate
forward
it.
to that. Exactly. Thank you to everybody for being on this call. Thank you, Jesper, as always. Thank you, Kono Sensei. And I
Thank
wish
you.
you a great evening, a great afternoon.
Thank you very much.
See you next time.
Good night.
Bye.
And,